Ethan's childhood never hinted at courtrooms or judges or the white-hot sting of injustice. He remembered summer evenings on the porch, his father Michael laughing as they shared ice cream that melted faster than they could eat it. Michael Walker wasn't a perfect man. He worked long hours, missed recitals, forgot birthdays, but every sacrifice carved a roof over Ethan's head, paid for books, and placed warm food on their small table. And then, with the brutality only real life can manage, everything collapsed. Michael trusted the wrong business partner. A man with a handshake smooth as polished glass and a smile that promised profit. Paperwork was forged, accounts bled dry, and before Michael understood what happened, the partner vanished, leaving his name attached to every lie. Now the state believed Michael Walker stole from the company he helped build. The prosecution smelled blood. Ethan could see it in their confident stride and in headlines flashing online. Local father accused of embezzlement. Neighbors whispered. Friends turned their eyes away. Even family members kept distance, as though innocence were contagious only backwards. Inside the courtroom, Michael sat stiffly at the defendant's table, eyes hollow, suit hanging loosely around shrinking shoulders. He had aged 10 years in 2 months. Ethan watched him fumble with a stack of documents, his breath hitching like each page carried another weight. When the public defender spoke to him, fast, curt, exhausted, it was clear Michael was just another case on an already unbearable docket. "We'll try for a plea deal," the man muttered. "It's the safest option." Michael nodded because he didn't know how to fight back. But Ethan did. He had spent nights hunched over borrowed law books, reading statutes he barely understood until sunrise carved lines beneath his eyes. He wasn't a lawyer yet, but he grasped one truth. His dad didn't deserve to carry blame that belonged to someone else. As court came to order, Ethan slid into the gallery behind his father. The prosecutor, a crisp woman with sharp confidence, launched into an opening statement that sliced like cold steel. She painted Michael as careless, reckless, greedy. Each word felt like a pebble hurled at Ethan's chest. His fist curled, his breath shortened. Michael swallowed hard, eyes reddening as though every accusation burrowed beneath his skin. Ethan leaned forward, whispering, "Dad, you're not alone." Michael didn't look back. Maybe he couldn't. Witnesses droned on. Financial analysts with numbers too complex. Board members who once smiled at Michael when he brought donuts to meetings, but now testified with mechanical, sterile indifference. Ethan watched his father shrink further with every sentence, spine curling inward as if trying to disappear. At one point, the prosecutor flashed a spreadsheet filled with highlighted transactions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced confidently, "these funds were transferred under Mr. Walker's authority to shell accounts. Accounts that have not been found." The gallery gasped. Ethan almost stood right then. He had proof those signatures were forged, proof he spent weeks chasing down, but the moment wasn't right. Not yet. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He could see his father break beneath this weight. If something didn't shift soon, Ethan never considered himself brave. He was the quiet one, the boy who sat at the back of class, who flinched when teachers called his name. The only time he ever raised his voice was on the football field, and even then, only long enough to call plays before falling back into silence. But watching Michael tremble, watching the prosecutor carve a false history like it was truth, something ancient and fierce rose inside him. He touched the folded papers in his jacket pocket, the files he'd pulled from dusty storage archives, the witness email he tracked across 3 states, the letter from the accountant too scared to come forward. They weren't perfect, they weren't polished, but they were real. A court clerk called for recess. Chairs scraped across the oak floor as everyone filed out. Michael slumped into his seat, face buried in his hands. "I ruined everything," he whispered. Ethan sat beside him, voice low, trembling with emotion. "No, someone took advantage of you, and I can prove it." Michael blinked, stunned, as if Ethan had spoken a language he had never heard before. "Son, we don't have a lawyer," he murmured broken. "This defender won't fight for us. We're done." Ethan inhaled deeply, the decision already made in his bones. "Dad," he said, standing slowly, voice steadier than it had any right to be. "We're not done. Not even close." And when recess ended, when the judge called everyone back and the prosecution poised for its next strike, Ethan rose, heart pounding, palms sweating, to interrupt the silence. He cleared his throat and said, "Your Honor," Ethan said, each syllable trembling through the room like a bell struck too hard. Every head turned. The gallery froze mid-movement. The public defender startled so violently his pen clattered to the floor. Michael gaped at his son, mouth parted, eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and dread. Judge Ramirez, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, lifted her gaze. "State your name," she said, voice clipped but curious. "Ethan Walker," he answered, "defendant's son." "And why?" The judge continued, leaning forward ever so slightly. "Are you standing?" Ethan swallowed. His throat felt raw, scraped from nerves and sleepless nights. Because I believe my father is being blamed for something he didn't do. And I have evidence." A murmur rippled across the benches like wind cutting through tall grass. The prosecutor stiffened, adjusting her blazer with a jerky tug. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Irregular," Ethan said, voice unexpectedly firm, "is watching an innocent man get sentenced because no one bothered to look past the first page." His father shut his eyes, pain twitching at the corners. Ethan could see the emotion etched there. Humiliation, fear, and beneath it all, something else, something flickering back to life. Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Walker, are you a licensed attorney?" "No, ma'am," Ethan replied immediately. "I'm a first-year law student." A gasp. Someone smothered a nervous laugh. But Ethan stood like the ground beneath him finally belonged to him. "And yet you wish to speak on a record?" the judge asked. "Yes." He hesitated, then added softly, "If no one else will stand up for him, I will." Silence settled. Ethan felt his heartbeat echo inside his skull. The judge deliberated for a long stretch of seconds, then finally gave a short nod. "You may approach," she said. "But understand, if you interrupt proceedings again without permission, you'll be removed." Ethan nodded and stepped forward. His father's eyes followed him, glassy with tears that hadn't fallen yet. Holding out a file, Ethan's voice steadied. These weren't included in discovery. He laid the papers on the table. Handwritten ledgers showing unauthorized changes. Signatures that don't match my dad's. And he inhaled shakily. Emails from the partner threatening to ruin him if he spoke up. Even the bailiff leaned closer. The prosecutor strode forward, snatching the first sheet. Her confidence faltered the moment she scanned the handwriting. "Where did you get these?" Ethan faced her squarely. "From a storage unit, under my dad's old account manager's name. Before he passed away, he kept every document from the firm. I tracked the lease records. I found it 2 weeks ago." Michael's jaw dropped. Not at the papers, but at the revelation that Ethan had been fighting this war alone, in secret, in the margins of exhaustion. The judge motioned to the clerk. "Enter these into review." Ethan exhaled sharply, knees almost buckling. He did it. He actually placed truth into the room. His father's voice came out hoarse. "Ethan, you did all that for me?" Ethan turned, blinking fast. "Of course I did, Dad. I couldn't watch you go down alone." For the first time in months, Michael lifted his head fully. His voice quivered. "You shouldn't have had to." "No," Ethan interrupted gently. "You shouldn't have had to either." His father squeezed his hand. That single touch was stronger than any jury verdict. And for a moment, time softened. If you were sitting there, watching a son stand for the man who raised him, what would you have done? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. And if words won't come, just tap like to show that loyalty still matters. The prosecutor, rattled but recovering, cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I request time to review this material." Judge Ramirez nodded. "Granted, court will recess until tomorrow morning." The gavel cracked, echoing deep inside Ethan's ribs like an answered prayer. The courtroom emptied fast, reporters bolting to their cars, spectators whispering speculation. But Ethan barely noticed any of them. His world had shrunk to a single, Trembling reunion at the defense table. Michael clutched Ethan's shoulders with both hands. You should have told me, he whispered. God, son, I thought I was dragging you down with me. You're the reason I made it anywhere at all, Ethan replied, voice breaking. You taught me to stand up for what's right. I just finally listened. Michael laughed, a cracked sound that swelled into something closer to relief. You always were stubborn, he said. They walked out together, side by side. Not a condemned man and his silent witness, but a father and son stepping into the cold night air with a new kind of fire in their chests. Outside, dusk smeared orange and violet across the sky. Ethan zipped his jacket against the rising chill. Michael cleared his throat gently. Can I say something? The older man ventured. Always, Ethan said. You saved me today. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, Dad. Today was just the first step. Tomorrow we fight for real. And somewhere deep inside Michael Walker's chest, a man who had already given up finally began to hope again. Morning light broke pale and uncertain over the courthouse, filtering through winter clouds like hope still deciding whether it wanted to stay. Ethan and Michael walked up the steps together this time. Not rushed, not defeated, but steady. Still, Ethan felt the tremble in his father's arm where their sleeves brushed. Courage didn't erase fear. It just carried it differently. Inside, courtroom 3B buzzed louder than yesterday. Reporters filled the back row, murmuring about the student who stood up. A few jurors shot Ethan curious glances, not hostile, not indifferent, maybe even impressed. His stomach twisted anyway. Michael leaned close. You sure about this? No, Ethan admitted truthfully. But I'm sure about you. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The prosecutor, Ms. Conrad, stood stiffly, a folder clutched like a shield. She didn't have yesterday's swagger. Her eyes flickered to Ethan with wary calculation. Court is now in session, Judge Ramirez announced. Ms. Conrad, you may proceed. The prosecutor inhaled deeply. Your Honor, after reviewing the submitted documents, I concede they raise questions. However, the chain of custody is unclear. The son acquired them independently. We need verification. Ethan felt his pulse spike. He hadn't thought about chain of custody. He wasn't trained to. But something stirred behind him. Soft footsteps, hesitant but purposeful. A woman in her early 40s, hair pinned back in a shaky bun, rose slowly from the gallery. Your Honor, she said, voice trembling. I can verify those documents. Everyone turned. State your name, the judge instructed. Grace Holloway, she replied. I worked as a junior accountant at Walker and Trent until they fired me for asking questions. The prosecutor whirled. Ms. Holloway, you never came forward. Grace swallowed hard. I was scared and ashamed and angry at myself for not speaking sooner. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't known anyone would follow the trail he started. Michael blinked at her in recognition. Grace, he whispered. She nodded without looking at him. I saw things. Those signatures, Michael's name forged, approvals entered seconds apart by the same terminal. I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late. The judge gestured her forward. Grace's hands shook as she placed her testimony into the light. Page by page, she confirmed Ethan's findings, cross-checking dates, initials, ledger entries she remembered typing herself. Each detail lifted a stone from Ethan's chest. Each correction placed another weight on the prosecution's. When Grace grew emotional, voice cracking, Ethan felt the room shift, not just legally, but morally. Something invisible but undeniable tilted back toward truth. And in that quiet turn, something else flickered inside him. The sense he was no longer fighting alone. Had you ever had someone step forward for you when everyone else stepped back? Right? Yes. And share their name. Gratitude deserves to be spoken aloud. The prosecutor rubbed her temples. Your Honor, we still don't know where the funds ended. Grace hesitated. I might know. She dug in her purse and produced a flash drive. The partner, Trent, he kept backups. I copied one file before they escorted me out. I didn't know what to do with it until now. A ripple buzzed through the courtroom like electricity striking steel. Judge Ramirez nodded to the bailiff, who connected the drive to a monitor. Rows of transactions appeared. Every misappropriation, every fraudulent transfer, draining directly into a private account under Trent's alias. Michael gasped. It was all there. The smoking gun. The prosecutor's face fell. She whispered something to her paralegal, likely a quiet curse. Judge Ramirez pressed her lips into a thin line. Ms. Conrad, do you wish to proceed? The prosecutor closed her eyes briefly, then looked up. Your Honor, with this evidence, the state will withdraw charges against Mr. Walker pending further investigation into Mr. Trent's actions. For a moment, no one moved. Then Michael exhaled a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Ethan felt his knees weaken. Grace covered her mouth. The judge struck her gavel, but her voice softened. Mr. Walker, you are released from all allegations as of this moment. Michael swayed. Ethan caught him, the two holding each other in a trembling embrace. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones snapped photos, but none of that mattered. Michael clutched his son like a man surfacing from deep water. I'm free, he asked, voice tiny. Yeah, Ethan whispered, joy swelling so deep it hurt. You're free. Grace approached, wiping tears. Michael took her hand with sincere gratitude. You could have stayed silent, he said. So could you, she replied gently. But none of us should have had to fight alone. Ethan nodded. Thank you for showing up. She smiled faintly. You gave me courage too. And just like that, three people who had never expected their paths to intertwine stood together, bound not by blood but by truth. Outside, news vans swarmed like hungry gulls. The Walkers didn't stop. They didn't pose or answer questions. They just slipped away into crisp morning air where the world seemed a shade brighter. Michael paused at the bottom step, sunlight touching his face like the first warm hand after winter. I thought my story was ending, he murmured. Ethan squeezed his shoulder. Sometimes endings are just the part where we start breathing again. And for the first time in months, Michael's posture straightened, not bowed by guilt but lifted by release. Freedom should have felt like fireworks, like trumpets, like credits rolling to triumphant music. But walking home that afternoon, Ethan realized the court might have cleared their name, yet nothing else about their life magically untangled. Not the debts, not the strained relationships, not the job Michael had lost in shame. Still, the air felt lighter, like they could finally breathe without swallowing glass. They turned the corner onto their quiet suburban street. The house was the same modest brown brick it always had been. Except now, for the first time in months, Michael didn't see it as a failure. He saw it as home. Inside, Ethan dropped his coat over a chair, exhaustion hitting him all at once. His limbs buzzed with adrenaline and fatigue. Michael leaned heavily against the counter, fingers splayed like he needed a second just to stay upright. You did it, Michael said softly. His voice had that faraway quality people get after surviving something impossible. We did it, Ethan corrected. Grace helped. Judge Ramirez didn't kick me out. And you? He looked at his father meaningfully. You didn't give up. Michael chuckled weakly. Oh, I wanted to. The admission wasn't dramatic, just painfully honest. Ethan nodded. But you didn't. That counts. A silence settled. Warm, quiet, almost peaceful, until Michael's eyes suddenly filled again. Ethan grimaced. Dad, why are you crying now? We already won. It's not that, Michael said quickly, wiping his face. It's just, the whole time, I thought I was failing you. And then you stood up there, stronger than I ever imagined. And I realized, his voice cracked. Maybe I wasn't such a bad father after all. Ethan felt something inside him loosen, some old, tight knot that had been waiting for that sentence. You were never a bad dad, he said. You were human, and you kept trying. That's more than most. Michael's shoulder eased, a weight finally set down. Outside, a soft drizzle began pattering against the windows, gentle as forgiveness. Later that evening, Grace knocked on the front door. She held a foil-covered tray and a shy smile. I didn't know what else to do, she said. So I made lasagna. It felt like a celebration meal. Michael laughed. The deep, warm sound Ethan hadn't heard in months. You have no idea how much we needed something normal. They sat at the kitchen table, three unexpected allies sharing food that tasted better than anything Ethan remembered. Between mouthfuls, Grace opened up more. When they fired me, she said slowly, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was too weak to belong there. But when the stories started about you, she nodded at Michael. I kept blaming myself for staying silent. Michael shook his head. You don't owe me that kind of guilt, Grace. Maybe not, she replied. But I owed myself the truth. She glanced at Ethan. And you showed me how to face it. Ethan swallowed hard. I was terrified. Grace raised an eyebrow. You didn't look it. That's the secret, he said with a half smile. You only have to look brave for 10 seconds at a time. Michael nodded with unexpected wisdom. And sometimes that's enough. After dinner, Grace left with a tired smile, promising to keep in touch. When the door closed, Michael leaned back with a sigh. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the world tears you down, and the people who help you rebuild aren't the ones you expected. Now it's your turn. Share one small good deed you did recently, even if it felt tiny. Write it below, so others remember that kindness hasn't died. Your story might shine a little light into someone else's dark. Ethan wiped the table slowly, thinking. When all this started, I kept waiting for someone to show up, he said. Family, friends, anybody. They disappeared, Michael murmured. Yeah, Ethan admitted. But then you stood up anyway. And I realized maybe waiting isn't the answer. Maybe being the person who shows up is. Michael gave a slow nod. That's harder than it sounds. But worth it, Ethan said. As night settled deeper, quiet wrapped the house. The rain tapered off, leaving the world outside glistening under street lamps. Ethan sat cross-legged on the couch, a stack of textbooks open beside him, highlighters trailing neon lines across annotated pages. Michael watched for a moment. Taking a break would be understandable. Ethan grinned. Can't. Finals next week. Michael shook his head in mock disbelief. You stood in a courtroom and turned a case upside down, and you're still worried about grades? Ethan shrugged. One victory doesn't mean I'm done learning. Michael paused. Son, I think you might already be a better man than I ever was. Ethan closed the book gently. Not better, he corrected. Just building for where you left off. It was a quiet sentence, but it landed with the weight of legacy. Michael smiled, eyes distant but hopeful. Maybe life gives us storms so we remember how strong our roots are. Ethan let that settle, and how badly we want to grow. They sat in that warmth. No verdict hanging overhead, no lies chasing their heels. Just the calm after the storm, the rebuilding stage, the chapter that rarely makes headlines but matters more than any verdict. Tonight they rested. Tomorrow they begin again, not from the ground but from solid earth reclaimed. Morning crept in with the kind of quiet that made the world feel newly made. The storm had passed, but the aftermath lingered like echoes, court documents on the counter, unopened mail stacked in a wary pile, and inside Michael, the truth that freedom didn't erase damage. Ethan left early for class, textbooks pressed against his chest and determination in his stride. Michael watched him walk down the sidewalk through the blinds. Pride warmed him, but so did something darker. Shame still clung like a shadow. He whispered into the empty room, I should have protected him, not the other way around. Michael needed to reclaim something, dignity, purpose, maybe his own reflection. So after a long shower and a cautious breakfast, he rummaged through a cluttered drawer, pulled out an old, coffee-stained resume, and exhaled. Time to start over, he murmured. By noon, he was downtown, slipstreaming between glass towers that once felt like home. He visited office after office. Some old colleagues pretended not to recognize him. Others offered strained condolences without invitations. Rejection after rejection crawled under his skin. But Michael kept knocking. At a small accounting firm tucked between a bookstore and a bakery, a manager named Linda paused at the doorway while reading his resume. She studied it longer than anyone else had. You've been through a lot, she said quietly. Michael cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. And you still came here in person? Yes, ma'am. She glanced up with something like admiration. Most people would have hidden. Michael shrugged. I've done enough hiding for a lifetime. Linda nodded slowly. We don't have a senior position open right now, but I could use someone part-time while tax season ramps up. Michael blinked. You're hiring me? I'm giving you a chance, she corrected. You'll do the rest. Michael nearly sagged with relief. He shook her hand with trembling fingers, thanking her more times than necessary. Outside, he stood under the midday sun, blinking like the light was a miracle. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in the back of a lecture hall, notebook open but mind elsewhere. His classmates whispered, glancing occasionally at him, their phones lit with yesterday's headline. Law student saves father in court. He didn't know how they found out, but everywhere he turned, someone stared. Curiosity, awe, suspicion all tangled together. His professor paused halfway through a contract law explanation. Mr. Walker, she said, might you share your perspective on self-representation and evidentiary risk? He'd shot to Ethan's cheeks. He hadn't slept enough to prepare for sudden fame. I think, he began slowly, sometimes doing the right thing means risking looking foolish, or failing publicly. But truth doesn't move unless someone is willing to push it. A hush fell, a rare gift in a room full of restless students. The professor nodded. Well said. Keep pushing. After class, a few students approached. A tall guy with nervous eyes stammered, Hey, my brother's going through something kind of similar. Can I come maybe talk to you sometime? Ethan blinked. Yeah, of course. A girl chimed in shyly. Your dad must be really proud. Ethan paused, absorbing that. He smiled. He is. And I am too. Walking home later, backpack heavy, Ethan replayed that moment. The first time anyone had ever said his father should be proud. And surprising thing? He believed it. At home, Michael greeted him at the door with news that burst like sunlight. I got a job, he said, grin spreading wide. Ethan let out a whoop, pulling him into a hug. I knew they'd see your worth eventually. Michael laughed. Took 36 doors to find the right one. That's all it takes, Ethan said. 1. They made celebratory grilled cheese sandwiches, and for a while, things felt wonderfully ordinary. But life never stands still long enough to stay soft. That night, as they sat on the porch watching cars drift past under amber streetlights, Michael turned serious. There's something I need to say, he murmured. Ethan nodded. I'm listening. Michael stared at his hands. When this all started, I became angry, bitter, and I pushed you away. I told myself I was protecting you from the fallout, but really, I was ashamed to let you see how lost I was. Ethan swallowed hard, heart tightening at the confession. And when you stepped in, Michael continued, voice trembling, I felt small. Like I'd failed. I need you to know I'm sorry for that. For making you carry more than a son should. Ethan took a deep breath, steadying the emotions split between pride and pain. If that moment hit you hard too, leave a red heart below. Sometimes one quiet symbol holds more meaning than any sentence we could type. He turned to his father fully. Dad, you've carried me my whole life. You didn't fail. You stumbled. And when you did, I got to prove I could stand too. Michael closed his eyes, letting those words wash the last poison from his bones. You didn't just stand, he whispered. You lifted me. They sat quietly, no words needed, as night wrapped around them, a father finally free, a son finally seen, and something new blooming between them. Respect that went both ways. Days passed, each one a little steadier than the last. The weight that once crushed their shoulders now lived only as memory, a bruise fading beneath skin. Michael left early every morning for his new job, straightening his thrift store tie with a pride that felt brand new. Ethan juggled class, study, and a flood of unexpected messages from strangers who had seen his story on social feeds. But healing isn't a straight climb. It bends, it stumbles, it circles back. One evening, Ethan came home to find Michael sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched like a man being swallowed by old ghosts. A letter lay open in front of him. What's that? Ethan asked, heart tightening. Michael didn't speak at first. Then quietly, from the bank, Ethan sat down. The numbers hit him like a punch, late fees, overdue mortgage totals stacked high like a verdict. Clearing his name didn't clear their debt. Months without income left deep gouges. "We could lose the house," Michael whispered. "We won't," Ethan said instantly, too quickly. His voice cracked on the last word. Michael rubbed his forehead. "I don't want you taking this on. You've done enough." Ethan leaned forward, eyes sharp with something fiery. "You didn't deserve what happened to you, Dad. But life didn't wait for justice. So we don't get to wait either." Michael shook his head. "I don't want to ask for help." "You're not asking," Ethan replied. "We're doing this together." But the truth hung heavy. The fight wasn't over. The next morning, Ethan stopped by a coffee shop on campus, laptop open, searching scholarships, part-time work, anything with a paycheck attached. His hands shook, not from fear of hard work, but from a memory of almost losing everything once already. He didn't want to watch his father lose again. A soft voice broke his focus. "Ethan." He looked up to see Grace, hair wind-tousled, coat still damp from a drizzle outside. "Grace? What are you doing here?" She smiled gently. "I was nearby. Thought I should check in." She hesitated. "You look like you could use a friend." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Things are better, but there's still fallout." Grace nodded knowingly. "Freedom doesn't erase consequences." "Exactly," Ethan murmured. She set down her coffee. "I know something that might help." She pulled out a small card. "A nonprofit legal aid foundation. They fight wrongful accusations and financial aftermaths. Sometimes they help stabilize families until they're standing again." Ethan stared at the card, not at the organization's name, but at the fact that someone cared enough to offer a lifeline. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. Grace touched his hand lightly. "You gave me my courage back. This is just me paying forward what you sparked." Have you ever had someone do one unexpected thing that changed your whole path? Drop a quick yes, and share the moment if you want others to feel less alone. That night, Ethan told his father about Grace's suggestion. Michael hesitated at first, pride flaring, but then he nodded slowly. "Maybe accepting help is part of growing, too," he admitted. The foundation's representative, a kind woman named Ava, visited their home 2 days later. She reviewed paperwork, asked gentle questions, and never once made them feel small. When she stood to leave, she smiled warmly. "We can pause foreclosure for 90 days while we work through your case and help renegotiate terms. You're not losing your home. Not on my watch." Michael's knees buckled. Ethan caught him by the arm. "Thank you," Michael whispered. Ava gave a soft nod. "You already fought once. We'll carry this round." After she left, Michael sank onto the couch, covering his face with both hands. Ethan sat with him, shoulder pressed against his, letting the relief rush over them like a tide. Finally, Michael lowered his hands. "I never realized how much I was holding alone." "You don't have to anymore," Ethan said. A silence settled, steady this time, not heavy. Later that week, life resumed a rhythm. Work for Michael, classes and study for Ethan. And somewhere between both worlds, confidence rooted deeper in them. But wounds always reveal a tender spot. On Friday night, as they walked home from the grocery store, they passed an intersection where 2 old acquaintances from Michael's former job stood waiting for the light. The men fell silent when they saw him. One nodded stiffly. The other turned away entirely. Michael's chest rose and fell, pain still raw. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let them look away if they want. They saw you at your lowest. They don't know who you were before or who you are now." Michael exhaled shakily. "It still hurts." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it will. But hurt is proof we're alive. And healing means we can keep walking anyway." Michael squeezed Ethan's hand briefly. "You teach me more than I ever taught you." Ethan smiled gently. "You gave me the chance. Be honest. Could you forgive people who walked away when you needed them most? Type forgive if you could, or never if it still feels too heavy." Together, father and son crossed the street, not defined by who turned away, but by the path they were choosing forward. Home glowed ahead of them with a porch light burning bright, waiting. Spring arrived softly, like the world was trying not to startle them. The trees outside their house stretched delicate green leaves toward the sky, and for the first time in a long time, Michael and Ethan woke up without that crushing edge of fear pressing down. But peace doesn't erase scars. It just lets you breathe around them. On a quiet Saturday morning, Michael stood in the driveway, hands shoved into his jacket pockets as he watched a moving truck rumble down the street. A new family was buying the foreclosed property 2 doors down, one of the only other homes in their neighborhood touched by hardship in the last few months. "Feels strange," Michael murmured, "watching other people lose what they love." Ethan joined him, steaming mug in hand. "Maybe they'll get another chance, too." Michael smiled sadly. "I hope so." 3 weeks into his job, he'd already proven himself invaluable, patching accounting issues, catching discrepancies, going the extra mile. Sometimes, when Linda appraised his attention to detail, he'd blink like he couldn't quite believe someone saw skill instead of suspicion. And at school, Ethan found people drawn to him, not because of fame, but because vulnerability had made him visible. Classmates sought advice. Professors pulled him aside to talk about internships. Ethan tried to take it all in stride, but there were still nights when the pressure kept him awake, staring at textbooks he couldn't absorb. One night, he pushed back from his desk with an exasperated groan. Michael peeked in. "Overthinking?" he asked gently. Ethan rubbed his eyes. "Just feeling like if I mess up now, I undo everything." Michael crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You earned your wins. One bad grade doesn't steal them away." Ethan nodded slowly, letting the reassurance settle like a blanket. But life was still holding one more surprise. The following week, Ethan received an email inviting him to speak at a local community event, a panel about standing up for family in times of injustice. He showed Michael the message. "I don't know if I should go." Michael frowned. "Why wouldn't you?" "Because," Ethan swallowed, "what if people think I'm looking for attention?" Michael stepped closer. "Son, you stood up because it was right, not because anyone was watching. Sharing your story might give someone else the courage you had." Ethan stared at the invitation again. Maybe his father was right. The night of the event, they arrived at a modest auditorium filled with folding chairs, families, volunteers, students, and a scattering of older folks listening quietly from the back row. Grace sat near the front, waving excitedly when she spotted them. Ethan's palms sweated. His stomach fluttered. But when he stepped onto that small stage, his eyes found Michael, steady, proud, unashamed. And the words came. He didn't talk about winning. He talked about fear and doubt, and the nights when he cried silently in the bathroom because he didn't want his father to hear him breaking. He spoke about watching a good man punished by lies, about how sometimes the world pushes honest people to the ground, and how every person deserves at least one hand that reaches down to pull them back up. He finished with a whisper that filled the room. You don't need to be fearless to fight. You just need to believe the person you love deserves justice. The audience rose in applause, not roaring, but heartfelt, the kind of clapping that means we needed to hear that. Michael stood, wiping his cheeks. He didn't try to hide the tears this time. After the panel, people gathered around to thank Ethan, ask questions, share their own stories. One young girl, maybe 12, tugged his sleeve shyly. "My brother's in trouble for something he didn't do," she said. "Do you think I could help him like you helped your dad?" Ethan knelt to her level. "I think your love already has." Her eyes shone, and Ethan felt something like purpose bloom inside him. Not temporary, but permanent. As they stepped outside into crisp night air, Michael placed a hand on his son's back. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I always thought my job as a father was to guide you. But somewhere along the way, you started guiding me." Ethan smiled, voice thick. "Maybe that's how family works. We take turns holding the map." Michael nodded. "I like that. If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Let's fill this moment with hope." Someone scrolling past might need to see it today. They walked to the car, shoulders brushing, silence soft and full. Not the silence of fear, but the hush that falls when a storm finally ends. But just before Michael opened the driver's door, he paused. "We survived the worst," he murmured. "So what comes next?" Ethan looked up at the stars, distant, tiny, but shining all the same. "Maybe the best," he said. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Michael let himself believe that could be true. Spring eased into early summer, and the world around the walkers seemed to grow with them. Flowers poked through soil that had once been frozen solid. Birds nested in the oak tree outside their window. Even the air felt different, like the universe had finally unclenched its fists. Life, slowly and quietly, was beginning to give back. One warm Saturday morning, Ethan and Michael stood shoulder to shoulder, painting their weather-beaten fence. The wood drank in new white paint greedily, transforming from tired gray to something bright, clean, and full of promise. Michael wiped sweat from his brow. "Guess this old place still has some fight in it," he joked. Ethan laughed. "Kinda like us." They were halfway through the second panel when a car pulled up to the curb. It was sleek, too sleek for their modest street. The door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a crisp suit and sunglasses. For a heartbeat, Michael stiffened, old instincts whispering threat. But the man raised both hands. "Mr. Walker? I'm not here to cause trouble." He introduced himself as an investigator from the district attorney's office, assigned to the case against Trent. "We want to let you know," he said, "the DA is filing full charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, identity falsification. It's moving forward." Michael's breath caught. "So he'll face what he did?" "Yes," the investigator answered. "And your cooperation and your son's initiative made that possible. We don't always get to say this, but justice is finally catching up." Michael nodded slowly, the words sinking in. "Not vindictiveness, just closure." The investigator added, "And if you're open to it, the DA's office would like you to speak at a community outreach event about wrongful accusations and recovery." Ethan blinked. "They want him to speak?" Michael swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because living through hell and standing back up matters," the man said simply. As he drove away, Michael watched the car disappear down the street. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice quiet but steady, he said, "I think I like to do that." They finished the fence with lighter hearts. Weeks later, in a small auditorium crowded with families, former defendants, lawyers, and community members, Michael stood at the podium. Ethan sat in the front row, hands clasped tight. Michael cleared his throat. "My name is Michael Walker," he began. "A few months ago, I thought my life was over." He told the truth, not polished or poetic, just raw and human. How he trusted the wrong man. How shame built walls around his life. How he pushed away the people who loved him because pain convinced him he deserved to be alone. How the world turned its back, and how one young man refused to. And that young man, Michael said, voice trembling as he pointed toward Ethan, saved me in more ways than one. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. He showed me that strength doesn't always look like a father shielding a child. Sometimes, strength is letting your child catch you when you fall. Ethan felt tears burning behind his eyes. Michael continued, "If you're going through something like this, remember, you don't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for. And you don't have to walk alone." When he finished, the applause rose like a wave, stronger than Ethan expected, louder than anything Michael had ever earned in his career. Not for his position, not for his resume, but for his resilience. Afterward, strangers approached Michael just as they had Ethan, thanking him, asking advice, sharing pain. Ethan watched with pride swelling like a tide. On the drive home, windows down, warm air whipping inside, Michael said softly, "You know what I realized today?" "What?" Ethan asked. "All this time, I thought the worst part of being accused was losing my job or my reputation." He shook his head, but it wasn't. The worst part was believing I had to carry it alone. Ethan nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. If this story moved you, don't slip away quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for every person who's been knocked down and got back up anyway. One click can say, "I felt this and I believe in second chances." They pulled into the driveway. The freshly painted fence gleamed in the evening sun, bright like a welcome, proud like a promise kept. Michael turned the engine off. "Son," he said, voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide, "I hope I never need saving again." Ethan grinned. "Then we'll just spend the rest of our lives living." Michael laughed. A free, open sound nothing like the hollow, haunted sound from months before. "And maybe," Ethan added, stepping out into golden light, "we'll learn that the best parts of our story were never the courtroom battles." Michael joined him, closing the door behind them. But what came after, Ethan finished. They walked toward the house, together, steady and whole. Because in the end, justice didn't just clear a name. It gave two men back their hope, their courage, their family. And somewhere far from courtroom floors and whispered judgment, two lives began again, not defined by ruin, but by redemption.